I'm Mark Mennell. For the last 10 years, have been Europe and Caribbean Director for Langham Preaching, which is part of Langham Partnership, which is the kind of umbrella for John Stott's legacy internationally. There are one or two things he did in the UK and they're independent, but I've been doing this for a number of years and involved with them for over 20 years. But I'm also someone who's really interested in issues of culture and the ways that affects the church. This topic of power is something I've been thinking about for not by any design on my part, but it's just evolved over the last 15 years. I started working on a book in 2010, which came out in 2015, called The Wilderness of Mirrors. And there are some copies inevitably on that shelf for purchase, not for stealing. But thinking about why our culture has become so suspicious. And there are many factors involved in that over the last 100, 150 years. But actually, to be crudely simplistic, in a nutshell, the bottom line is people are suspicious because they have had their fingers burned by the abuse of power. Whether it's to do with the grand sort of macro geopolitical things, the 20th century is just a catalogue of these things happening on an industrial scale, all the way down to the very personal and individual. And churches are by no means excluded from this. But I had no idea when that came out how close to home all these things were going to come. At the time, the big illustration, it was turned into a movie, Spotlight. You might have seen about those journalists at the Boston Globe investigating the Archdiocese of Boston, the Catholic Archdiocese. And before the film came out, I'd read a book that the four main journalists put together called Betrayal. And it was deeply, deeply traumatizing to read that book. I was sitting in the British Library reading this and just weeping. But that was the most concrete evidence of this thing. And I remember deliberately saying in the book, but of course we can't look at that and say, okay, well that's Catholicism for you. It's in our backyard. But I just didn't know. But now I do, and it seriously is, not just in our backyard, sometimes it's even in our front rooms, in our church circles. And so over the last few years, last 5 years or so, there's been story after story, and I found myself completely, again, it's out of my hands, but I found myself on the fringes of a lot of the stories that have actually really hit the headlines. So I was led to Christ by Jonathan Fletcher, and found myself connected in different ways to some of the things that have hit headlines. So that's where I'm coming from. I'm married to Rachel. We've got 2 kids who are in their 20s, left home, but probably going to come back quite soon when they don't have money. Anyway, that's how it works. They're great. I love them to bits, but I'm not giving them all money. Right. I thought I'd start with a little thought experiment. I've not used this before, but let's see what happens. So I was imagining what I might say to a church council or group of elders or whatever on my first sort of time, maybe on a staff retreat. It's rather a lovely place like this, where we go away to think about what the vision would be and how it's all going to be lovely under this new regime, regime being the opposite word, and just thinking about how I felt a sense of why I was here. And I think I can safely say that I am a leader. People have told me this. I know it. I have a sense that I've known this since I was born, and you could even say I was born to lead. I don't know how I know it, but I've known this all my life. I just have this conviction. I've never had a sense of what capacity or in which sort of walk of life this would come, but I knew that it would come. And part of the interest, part of the adventure was trying to explore and discover where. And I embraced it early on. And what I was being taught, I had this sense, all the way through school and university, that it was preparing me for something. And it would all come in useful, it would all serve a purpose, because I believe in a God who is sovereign. And all the pieces of the jigsaw, they would all slot into place. It would take time, perhaps, to see the picture of the jigsaw, maybe even years. But in retrospect, it would all make sense. These steps, these pieces in the jigsaw of responsibility, I knew it was coming. And my calling to Christ was a calling to serve. I'm no doubt about that. My calling was to serve as a leader. And for those who've been given much, much is required. And I've known this all my life. And I was given much. Privileges and opportunities aplenty, for which I'm eternally grateful to the Lord. Teachers who taught me, servants who served me, leaders who mentored me. I have so much, which is what makes me so well prepared for this moment. Uniquely so, perhaps, but that must explain why I've been so well equipped. I mean, I've had all this privilege to bring me to this point, and you think, this is what it means. And I've been walking this path my whole life. I've known this. And my privilege obliges me. It was a matter of time. So now I serve you as I lead you. I slave away for you, as I always expected to. I serve you because I love you. I love you because I was called to love you. I have no choice. The Lord called me to this. I am here for you. And this is why you respect your leaders. Why you imitate your leaders, why you submit to your leaders, why you are a joy and not a burden. This is why you love your leaders, because you know they serve you. The question is, my friends, my brothers and sisters, will you be my joy or my burden? Will you listen? Will you be loyal? Will you lay down your life for Christ? Will you be led by the one person that God has put in place to lead you? Even when it's hard or painful or costly, will you take up your cross by submitting to me? Will you accept that you're not the only one who has to carry the cost? That it costs me to lead you? That life for me as your leader is hard enough as it is, without having to manage the details of every individual's life. So will you trust me to make decisions on your behalf? Will you bear with me while I sort out some of the really tricky issues that face us as a community? Will you back me when I'm under enemy fire from outsiders who will never get us? Will you let me be the leader God has called me to be? What do you make of that?
You've got the job.
That's already taken. I mean, that's already sorted. It's too late now. But thank you.
It's a caricature, but I can see the themes. Yeah.
Go on.
Well, it's a different vision of leadership than servant leadership with Jesus, isn't it?
But I'm your servant.
Born to lead. Yeah, it's articulating. It's using the language of serving us to say, "Do what I say."
Mm-hmm. And the subtle shift between calls to loyalty to Christ, but actually loyalty to you.
Mm-hmm.
Those lines are quite blurred.
Mm-hmm.
It's very you focused and not Christ focused.
But I talk about Jesus all the time, Felix. Yeah.
It is, I think, we just said is basically true, but it's only half of the story. So you haven't put anything in about accountability, you haven't put anything in about me getting you getting things wrong, about your weakness, about your own failure, about their responsibility to challenge you and encourage you and be brothers. It is entirely in that hierarchical, I will come and serve. So actually, I'm not sure any specific thing you said. I mean, there's a couple of things I wouldn't say like that, but I don't actually think there's any specific thing you said I'd go, that's absolutely wrong. But I think it's only half the story.
And in a way, that's part of the problem, isn't it? And so often with these things, it's not what is said, but what isn't said that is the giveaway. So yeah, helpful.
Living with a backdrop of a sense of entitlement that comes sort of settling across as well.
Everything's been preparing for this moment. Yeah. Any hand here?
No, sorry, just playing with pen.
Just don't play with your pen, please.
Sorry, boss.
No, it's all right.
I think quite a lot of that is my internal narrative. I don't think I've ever said it that clearly to somebody, but I do think that I think like that quite easily.
I think that's very honest, and I would agree. Not about you, about me. And I think it's one of the things that gets triggered in conflict. So this is the backstory. Why are you questioning me? Even if actually they're not questioning me, they're just asking a question. But there's a very thin line between those two. Yeah.
I felt quite uncomfortable by this hearing. And I felt that
So you felt uncomfortable.
I felt uncomfortable as if someone come in and saying that to be my leader, I feel quite uncomfortable. And then I feel like the privilege is talking about not you.
The character.
Yeah, the character is talking about making me feel like, how can I relate to that? How that person can relate to me when I don't have that privilege, when I don't have that conviction, when I'm always clueless and then doubting all the time, and then I feel like that's someone on TV or something. It's not related.
That's a good analogy actually. There is a distance, which is deliberate actually. You playing with a pen?
No, I think just one thing that makes me sad is a lot of what's you said is familiar. I'm thinking of a particular situation that I was kind of adjacent to, and it was exactly that. It wasn't about what was said always, it was about what wasn't said. There was a conflation of serving and loving Christ and serving and loving me, very much a false humility and saying, I'm here to serve. Like, why won't you back me? And because a lot of what was said was really, really positive, it went over lots of people's heads, and so it ended up with a church split where you had half the people saying, "No, what? How dare you criticise him? He's God's man," and the other half say, "How can you follow him? He's a narcissist."
Agony. And yet, not rare.
Yeah, kind of similar with the sort of narcissism. Some of your language was subtly but emotionally manipulative. Are you going to be my joy? It's kind of
that. I was trembling as I said that because I just thought I couldn't imagine being on the receiving end of that in real life, as it were.
I was in a sermon.
Really?
Basically.
Wow.
I've never heard the person say it, but I've heard the people around them say, "We need to be that person's joy. We need to be that person."
It's so powerful. I mean, who wants to be a burden, for heaven's sake? Although one of the fascinating things about John Stott, just sort of as a side point, that actually one of the lessons he learned towards the very end of his life is that actually we should all expect to be everybody's burden, which is a nice sort of way of flipping that, but that's a long way down the track. We won't get back to that. Good. Any other thoughts on that? I think it's been helpful.
I think it's really difficult to challenge, like you said, because it's so subtle. It's a very difficult thing to tackle if you see it in somebody. It's just very clever, and it might often be the person might not be conscious of it. So it's not like sort of something blatantly, clearly, straightforwardly wrong.
I mean, I could so easily imagine everything I said being an application from a passage from 2 Corinthians or something. So then it has the weight of scripture behind it. Oh yeah, that's what this passage means. Kind of. Yeah.
I wonder whether, because obviously the speaker is coming from the mindset of I know better than you do. Because
Yes.
I have all this knowledge and then all the privilege and all the education and the superiority I have. But his intention sounds very noble. So I believe that he had complete conviction that he's been given by God the call which he loved to serve others. I just made me wonder, is that the kind of things very similar to old age when Christians went to mission field and colonization and said, I'm teaching you better than that. I know what God said. You native, you don't know anything. I'm doing it. I had an education in Oxford, but I'm laying down all that and then going to Africa.
If you knew what I'd given up for you.
Yeah, it's, you know what I've done for you, kind of things. I think that kind of, coming back to me thinking, is that the kind of mindset we used to have? Is that why the receiving end wasn't really complete in harmony?
I love that. And missiology is something that for the last 20 odd years more has been something I've thought a lot about because I'm always working in a cross-cultural context. And how we relate to people different from us within the kingdom is absolutely crucial. So this gets right to the heart of that question, actually. And one of the things I hear quite a lot in mission circles, and it's painful to recognize this in our own situations, but I will hear, well, we've got so many resources, they don't. We need to share our resources. So off we'll toddle. And maybe we'll build a link with our pastor in a church in Zambia or Estonia or wherever, and we'll go there every year and really serve them. Well, that's great, but what are you doing when you're there, and on whose terms is it, and who's setting the agenda for that, and what is your curriculum, and why are you doing what you're doing, and why would you think that, having worked through Leviticus over 3 years in your church, it'll be helpful there, and whatever it is. Now, it may be that it is, but actually, I see, thankfully most of the time from afar, that is not even a question people ask. Because it's just the assumption, well, look at what we've got. Noblesse oblige, that's the one phrase I didn't use. But my family background was, they were imperialists. My father was the last one in a long line who served the empire. Dad was in the army, and he was in various places. He was in Aden, he was in Cyprus, he was in Beirut, and various other things. This is what you did. You have so much, and you go to serve. Well, yes, but when you put it under the banner of imperialism, it's, well, I'm not going to get into that. But how are we that different? Anyway. I want to, you've got the outline, hopefully, if the QR code worked. If it didn't, sorry. This was an article. I'm not going to say where it was written, in what context, but I wonder if you can guess who the writer was. I'd be absolutely bowled over if you can, so don't worry if you can't. The most effective pose is one in which there seems to be the least of posing. And X had learned well to act without the paint and powder of an actor. What is behind that mask of his? What will to power? He has the power in him to do great good for this country or great injury. Men like X, with all their capacity for great and good work, are unsafe in a democracy. Men like X, with all their capacity, X calls himself a Democrat and an ist, and no doubt he does so in all earnestness. But every psychologist knows that the mind is ultimately slave to the heart, and that logic can always be made to fit in with the desires and irrepressible urges of man. X has all the makings of a dictator in him. Vast popularity, a strong will, ability, hardness, and intolerance for others, and a certain contempt for the weak and inefficient. In this revolutionary epoch, Caesarism is always at the door. Is it not possible that X might fancy himself as a Caesar? He must be checked. We want no Caesars. That wasn't Caesar. Anyone know who said that?
Either about or by Boris Johnson.
And possibly both. Yeah, I hadn't thought of that, but I think that's the reality. Yeah.
Is it about Churchill?
No, but right era. Someone who knew Churchill. Actually, he might even have been at school with Churchill. No, I think slightly different generation. But that's going to still blow you off scent, because actually you would never have imagined that he was, but he was. Shall I tell you? It's this man, Jawaharlal Nehru. And it was written in the 30s. He became the first independent India Prime Minister and was in power for nearly 20 years. And it was written in 1937 in an article called Modern Review by somebody using the name Chanakya. So it was anonymous. And the author was later revealed to be Nehru himself. He said, I wrote it for amusement, sent it to a woman friend who had it published. Gandhi was even indignant, thinking some enemy was attacking me. Asked whether he thought the judgment correct, he said, I suppose if a man can see such weaknesses inside himself and discuss them, this is advanced proof he will never succumb to them. Well, it's not necessarily proof, but it is an indicator. It is helpful. And I think that's the point I want to make. We're going to look at some dark things, and we're going to talk about it. Because one of the things I think is the problem in church circles in this country, North America and other places, is that they've not been talked about. If they're never talked about, if there's no vocabulary or framework for them, then people don't recognize when the telltale signs are there. And that's one of the things you hear again and again. People who will say, there was something wrong, but I didn't know what, and it made me feel like a worm, but I couldn't explain it so people believe me, and all of this stuff is not talked about. Now, I think there are various reasons for this, but if you think about it, if you think about how we engage with inquirers and their questions, and that's something I'm passionately interested in and committed to. Basically, for the last 300 odd, maybe longer years, obviously the gospel has been assaulted from all kinds of different angles, but primarily the framework for those assaults has been philosophical. Truth. How can you believe this? It might be epistemology, it might be evidence, it might be whatever. I'm speaking in the broadest brushstrokes. And so we think about questions of truth all the time as we are engaging. When you're preparing your sort of, Mission Week talks or whatever you might be doing. Those are the kinds of things. How can we help people believe this? To believe what we believe, because we, to us, think it's just self-evident or whatever. But what we haven't done is thought about power and how power operates. And so that doesn't seem as significant or important. And the reality is, and I'm going to look at why in a second, but the reality is that in terms of where our culture and world is at, yes, the philosophical hasn't disappeared entirely. We still got to do that stuff. But actually, the assaults now, and you see this in academia massively, are sociological, not philosophical. They're to do with how power operates in groups, how power determines what is the line, what is the ethic, what is the way of life. And you can see this all over the place. But I think it's kind of caught us unawares, certainly in evangelical circles, or I don't know what churchmanships are represented here, but I imagine it's the same in Catholic circles, because that is the assault as well. but it completely caught us unawares that actually, we haven't even really thought about this. I don't remember a single talk about power when I was being trained for ministry 25, 30 years ago. Not a single one. I think we had something on group dynamics or something, but it was very pragmatic and vaguely useful, I suppose. But we didn't really explore, actually, well, I've been ordained in the Church of England for X years now. We didn't explore what power that gives me, the unspoken, the soft, as well as the sort of official power that gave me, and how that would skew dynamics between people. It didn't even occur to me. But that is now what everybody has antennae for. And it's like, whoa, what happened there? So what I'm going to start with is just looking at the way in which actually this has always been there in Scripture. This is not new. I am emphatically not jumping on a bandwagon here. I've been accused of that when I talk about this stuff. Oh, well, it's just because, I don't know, Black Lives Matter or whatever, and they use wokeism. I hate the way that wokeism is now just a catch-all, whereas actually there are genuine issues of substance behind where that language has come from that need addressing. And that's not being hip and trendy. That's just simply saying, oh, well, I've read my Bible and that warned me about this. And so to talk about power actually is to be biblical and to think about that in a very robust and clear way. So I've got some verses here, they're on the sheet, and it'd be great just to work through, just get into little huddles. Now, the top one is where we've got the name of the book of essays I mentioned. So Mark Sterling is a friend who's a theologian in Scotland. He now lives in Inverness, just outside. And we've been chatting about this for a number of years, and we put this together, mainly because a lot of the books about this area are really helpful. There's some great books, and I put them on the reading list, but they tend to be written by psychologists or psychiatrists. They come from a very particular field, and that's important. But the problem is, we often found that the people who needed to read them wouldn't read them because they're not biblical. Or that they're not theologians. And sometimes they would make fairly basic theological errors because that's not their field, which is, you can't blame them for that. They're informed, but sometimes they're things. So what we try to do is get people from a range of fields, from biblical studies, systematics, history, pastoral, and homiletics and things, to just give us their perspectives on this. And it's an attempt. We didn't get all the essays we wanted. We tried to make it pretty international. It wasn't quite as broad as we planned, but I think there's some good stuff in there from all kinds of different people. But the verse that was central to our thinking is Jesus, and it's a very, very familiar passage. Let me just read the whole paragraph. You know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. In other words, we all know how this works. We all know. It's completely obvious, it's totally familiar, and you know that if you are dealing with, I don't know, a centurion or a tax collector or whatever, you know how it works. You might not like it very much. In fact, you probably absolutely despise it, but you know how it works and you know what you've got to do. Not so with you. Those 4 words, it seems to me, encapsulate the whole point. In other words, whatever you say about how power operates, he doesn't say don't use power, but however it is used, it must be fundamentally different from the way the world works. And yet the tragedy of the last 10, 15, 20 years is that people look at the church and say, oh, it's just like the others. You're running this like a corporation or a business. You're just protecting the brand, the name of the work. Oh, we've got to protect the work. Not so with you. This isn't Wall Street. This isn't Madison Avenue. This isn't the City of London. This isn't Parliament. This isn't Whitehall. This is the kingdom. Not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to be great among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first must be your slave. And I wonder whether that's where one will begin to unpack the thought experiment. You want to be first, don't you? Just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. That just changes everything. Someone once said, how do you know if you're servant-hearted? Well, you know by how you behave when you're treated like one. Do you know who I am? Don't you think Jesus, at any point in his entire ministry, he could have turned around and said, do you know who I am? He did ask that occasionally, but not with that tone of voice. Okay, so just have a look through some of the other verses. And I know this is slightly naughty, just proof texting and stuff. But it's proof texting and stuff, so that's fine. But just see if you can draw one or two sort of threads and common themes, and maybe this could spur private personal study and follow-up, because this is just the surface. But I just want to show that this is not new, and that actually you can find this in all kinds of different parts of Scripture. Okay, just for a few minutes. Introduce yourself to someone you're near. Even if you came in the same car, perhaps. I don't care. Go
Where do I exercise power?
Sorry, that's they were the boss or you were the boss?
It's helpful to have this backdrop. So you think about
challenging,
Yeah.
Absolutely.
That's me. Go on, Charlie.
Ocker.
Good. Well, that's a good day to come.
Yes. You're very wrong for us. Particularly any time there's nothing like this.
Yes.
That's possible. It's in the rest.
I'm Matthew.
Yeah.
I think I'm
You've got blood on the phone.
Cool. So the your one's about the shepherds. So you should not shepherds. You have not strength for the weak. You have not ruled them half brutally. They were scattered because there was no shepherd. They were scattered the whole way and no one searching it. This was something that was I'm against the shepherds. They were accountable for the flock. So the shepherds can no longer feed themselves.
Managing progress Jeremiah mentioned as one of the
Yeah, so you see the I bring something free and riff on the fact they are the most stupid actions. So really the current one.
Their assistants also loaded.
So he's going
Do I go and do that person?
Sounds true. Yeah, I think
which is the opposite of what so she's not there, isn't she?
Yes.
So, Jeremiah.
I enjoy what he said. He is itself joy and growth through serving God. But I'm not doing place burdens at the same time. So I want to
Well, here's the thing, it is enjoy. It's not. There is something about
5 more minutes. If someone would like to start from the bottom now.
spoil a child by not giving them responsibility and not holding to account, always saying yes. The kind of parent who's overstaying a child is not a good parent. The first few years, anyway. And I think there is something about if you actually do this serve who's carrying everything, everything becoming independent. So if you need something that's shared,
that's the year in role, which is now I'm expecting to be I'm wanting to kind of hand on, but in such a way that I don't have a place. People don't feel they feel like the yoke is easy rather than oh my goodness, I've just got to do all this stuff.
there is some like this. They take on leads of other and it's not that they shouldn't do any of those things, but there is something that's saying, well, where is the place of your church, your service, my church, and you go and take that to me, and you'll work the night to get extra £2,000. Well, is that the right fit? Because we see people in places, lots of other roads, church can be the only road. And sometimes say, no, actually, they can it's goofy. It's goofy, but it feels easy. Early in the morning. Then you're allowing yourself up early. But I think there's something about that. So it's actually about sharing things. It's something I can't find it. When you become a service provider. I was really hard to kill almost what the opposite. If you actually didn't tolerate all the council, I feel on the receiving end.
Yeah, but I was very much
absolutely from people that should help them.
It's like being outside without damaging the brand as well. Rather than public exposure.
Well,
things is great, and it depends. It's not just
That's what I like.
I was looking at a picture for spiritual and one of the things is we sometimes set with very principles. We're thinking primarily committed crimes because those actions of war, they're prisoners of war, they're because of this
Numbers are up. They're up. This all you have to do is that. I think it's definitely
He wanted to come letting criminals.
Okay, let's look up there.
Yeah. Always.
I'm very conscious that this is a cursory thing and that each of those passages would require diligent study, obviously, to get to the bottom of them. But just to give a sort of thumbnail sense, how might we summarise and encapsulate some of these ideas? Well, I've got sort of three central questions. What is God like? What do we learn about good leaders? What do we learn about bad leaders? Very sort of basic, crude, but let's just see if we can give a few sort of bullet points on these and just get a sense of actually how the Bible has always been talking about this stuff. And somehow we just didn't see it. Or we did, but we just didn't think it was about this. But it is, because what else is it about? Anyway, any thoughts? So let's start. What do we learn about God, either by inference or by explicit statements?
He looks after people
Right.
and wants the fun. So it's just, it's a bit generic, wants the best for them, but
That means often, yeah.
But yeah, and kind of, he's the shepherd who wants his sheep to flourish and thrive and things to go well for them.
And to live up to my name of state the obvious sweeting, but he is the one with absolute power. His power makes our power like minuscule, and yet he chooses to use it to serve and to bless and care.
Right. Yes, absolutely.
And he will hold people accountable. He
Okay.
he died for them.
Mm.
And if you hurt them, well, you're in trouble.
Right.
Yeah.
He puts himself out for people.
Right.
Self-sacrificial.
So, yes, that's it.
He serves with humility.
Yep. I should have had a bigger box.
He acknowledges leadership.
Hmm.
So, in the Acts passage, it talks about keep watch over the flock within the Holy Spirit has made you overseers.
Right.
So he acknowledges and approves, etc., of leadership, but there is a right.
Should we say leadership is not bad?
Yeah.
Or even a gift?
It's God given.
Yes. Ooh, who put that there? I think it was down. Anyway, yeah. I mean, actually, this is the easy one to answer, isn't it? Because this is what we do. But this is the framework And the benchmark, this is the one by which everything else is measured. Okay, so good leaders, for want of a better adjective.
Mark, can I just
Yeah, go for it.
one thing I noticed about all these references in terms of what they reveal about God is it's not revealing the whole picture. So there's a lot about his care for loving hearted, not much about him judging the wicked.
Right.
Do you know what I mean?
Yep. So I could have made a much bigger deal of that.
Yeah.
And particularly the prophets. You just have 5 minutes in Amos,
Yeah.
and you think your knees start knocking because you think, oh, okay, actually this is a bit close to home.
Yeah.
So no, that's absolutely right. This is arbitrary.
Yeah.
But it needs to be pointed out. Yeah. Thank you.
In one sense, the answer to this box is the same as the box above that.
See above. But are there explicit things in the verses you looked at, passages you looked at, we could just name?
Serve others, not yourself.
Right. But as we saw, that is dangerous language. But yes. And isn't it interesting that that's become part of business guru practice, isn't it? I mean, I remember hearing a talk years ago when I was at Ridley Hall, that's where I trained, about how servant leadership was the mantra in training of CEOs. And yet you can't quite see how they're talking about what Jesus is talking about.
It's not when their salary is 56 times.
No, well, I think I'm just the wrong kind of servant. Yeah, sorry, go on.
Yeah, so it is potentially twistable language saying serving yourselves, but in the Ezekiel passage, woe to you who only take care of yourselves, should not just take care of the flock. It then gives a load of examples of what taking care of yourself looks like. And actually, you could see that in the serve others language. Oh, I'm just serving others, and I just happen to get something out of it.
The worker deserves their wages.
Yeah, taken to an extreme.
The worker deserves their desert island.
So I guess the not yourselves needs capital letters or something in that. Not literally, you don't have. Yeah, there you go. That's fine.
Will that do? Yeah.
Can we talk about good leaders bear good fruit? And it's just that bad leaders don't. But then presumably we do see good fruit through the ministry of bad leaders and stuff. So let's unpack that.
That's I was going to say a can of worms, but that's good fruit. But yes, and you're absolutely right. But the interesting thing is, we think we know what good looks like. That's a good definition. And we usually think good means many.
We were just having that discussion.
Oh, right.
It's like, protect the brand because numbers are up. So we must be doing good stuff. So let's protect the brand so numbers stay up.
Yeah.
Wait a minute, is that death? Is that actually good fruit?
Yeah.
Anyway,
and the fruit. I mean, actually, if you think about, we've got a little garden. We planted some trees when we moved to where we are, just 10 years ago, and there's still not a lot to see. And there's certainly not. We've got an apple and a maple and various different things, and they're still pretty diddy. And I'm the kind of gardener that's very good at removing and destroying things. I'm rubbish at putting things in. Rachel does that bit. But it's one of the reasons I don't like gardening. It just takes too long and you just don't get any reward for it until about 20 years later, and then you move. So what's the point? No, I know that's just terrible. But the thing is, fruit take a long time. They take years. And maybe actually what we're talking about is a lifetime, and maybe actually the fruit is only seen post-mortem. And you hear these stories of extraordinary missionaries, often single women sort of ploughing the fields in North Africa for years and seeing one convert, and then when they die, their funeral is packed, and they never knew. That's the kind of fruit we're talking about, but you can't measure that.
And do you think it refers to character as well? So things like humility.
Yeah, because of course that language is a very New Testament language for character. I mean, the fruit of the Spirit. What else is that? And actually, isn't it interesting? You know how Jesus updates Isaiah's allegory of the vineyard. So it's Isaiah 5, and then it's updated in Luke 20. And it's interesting, isn't it, that if the vineyard is Israel, what is God looking for? But what does he find? Well, he's looking for obedience and holiness and worship, and he finds bloodshed and violence. And so you have one of the most poignant verses in Scripture. I will send my son, perhaps they will respect him. Don't you think that's one of the most poignant? Perhaps they will respect him. Well, of course, we know they won't. They'll kill him. But it's extraordinary. But to bring about the same end, fruit. So yeah, it has to be character.
But there is also genuine good fruit that comes from bad ministry by God's grace.
Absolutely right. Which tells us what?
That God is good, and it's his fruit.
It's his fruit. So if there's good fruit from a good ministry, it's not because the ministry is good. Which is not a reason to not worry about it being good. It's just that it's not like a sort of engineer's equation.
The minute fruit depends on us getting everything right, you've got a problem.
Yeah, it's going to be pretty mouldy. Let's see how long we can string out this metaphor. But yeah.
I think too there's perhaps when you're in a church that is small and declining, that the sense that here's somebody who's growing a church, a big church, counter the culture and the pressure, they must be a good minister, they must be good fruit. That's a subconscious feel in our situation. To sort of not draw that simplistic line between I see a growing church, therefore. I think it's even harder in a culture where the church is declining and we all want church growing and sort of think, that must be.
So that's really important. One of the essays I really hoped we would get, and it was just, President Putin interrupted this because he invaded Ukraine, but Ukraine is a country I've done quite a bit in. And the last 2.5 years is just, it's the first time a war has affected me in my core. And I've got dear friends there, including a guy who I've done a lot with, and we're hoping to do more in the future. He grew up in a Christian family. His grandfather was the vice president of the Soviet Baptist Union. And his father was an engineer and an underground pastor, and this friend Sergei grew up under communism, and he's been a Baptist minister amongst other things in Kyiv. And we've chatted quite a lot about this stuff, and he was working on an essay before the invasion happened about power abuse in the Soviet Baptist Church, which was incredibly hierarchical and controlling, even to the point where some were cultic, if not cults. But what you can't say it drove it, but it was a major factor, was that they were being surveilled and persecuted by the KGB. Sergei would say the KGB knew who all of us was. We went to church every week knowing that any day they could just come in. We knew that was possible. He's taken me to a forest outside Kyiv where they used to have Sunday services in the summer outside to not a beautiful forest. And it was very moving being there, thinking, there would be 80, 90, 100 people gathering to worship the Lord in this wood so that nobody would see them. But the KGB probably knew that they were doing that too. And his grandfather was killed by the KGB. They're 90% sure that that's what happened to him. And so these unbearable pressures actually lead to people saying, we've got to hold the line, we've got to keep together, we've got to be united. And it's so easy for these to become a tool to control, because that's exactly what they were. And so there are many people who've come out of that broken, not so much by communism, but by the heavy shepherding in the church. And what a tragic irony. But, when we've been talking, I just think, wow, I can so see that. That's how it happens. It's external pressure. I mean, isn't it interesting, Philippians, it's a letter not about joy, but unity in the context of persecution. Anyway, I don't know how we got into that, but it was a good point. The last one before we move on. Yeah.
One of the reasons I think that growth often looks like success is because actually growth is popularity. And so I think even if you're a relatively small church, or even if you're facing opposition, but if it's somebody that basically is one of us doing our sort of thing, facing the same sort of things, like there's so much of it we actually go instinctively. And you see that time and time again when issues are raised, the people actually respond instinctively to I couldn't possibly believe that person could do that. Or, oh, but they're doing this, it's so good. Or, but there's loads of other people who don't have that same problem. And so I think there's often when we think of fruitfulness, we can think numbers. I think often we just think, what do we think of somebody? Do we think that they're doing good stuff? Do we like the flowers this plant is producing or not? And actually, it's so simple. We don't think through what are our metrics of success or faithfulness or whatever.
It's a word that I've come to loathe, metrics. I loathe the word, but I work
with imperialists.
Sorry?
You're more of an imperialist.
That's right. No, good.
Quick.
LSD for me all the way. Anyway, but working for an international mission, that we're not an agency as such, but we do missions, that is entirely dependent on funding, most of which comes from North America. An increasing amount comes from the UK and other places. So it's trying to right that balance a little bit, but anyway, that's another story. But the donors are all about metrics. And we've had to come up with new ways of doing metrics for how you train preachers. I mean, don't even get me started. You might have to raise that later. Anyway.
If it's intended for.
Yeah,
I know you said it's the last comment, but
for you, Steve,
I wanted to say on good leaders, actually, if a good leader doesn't get in the way, but is an under shepherd, then actually you do see the good fruit of Christian character growing in those contexts. And it's been a joy to me to visit churches as a visitor. I can think of one in London, I can think of one a couple I visited here. And you just kind of feel the Christian character in the room as a visitor. And obviously you don't know all the particular sins and challenges, but you see something good growing.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, you can really have the last word.
Can I make a point that, because you're talking on a visitor, I remember about a friend of mine, and then he pointed out saying that the way he judged the church rather than number or worship songs or anything, he was looking into as if that social program, feeding hungry, and then giving things away, and then anything like that. Without seeing that in the church, he wasn't convinced. That visitor wasn't convinced that this is a good church that he might consider to become Christian, because he thinks that the Christianity to his mind as a non-believer was Jesus helping poor, and then when he doesn't see that in the church, he thinks that hypocrite. no matter how beautiful the church building was, wonderful worship was, and how many congregation was.
And what a brilliant sermon.
He didn't care about it. He said, well, I can see the hungry, homeless right in front of church. Nobody said hello. And then for him, was turned off. I think so it is very important for us to having right character, but we come to actually your Psalm 146 and 147 pointed out that we actually have to have an action to go with, to heal the broken heart, find the their needs, and cause for oppressed, give food to the hungry, set the prisoners free. If we don't do that, that's bad leaders. That's fine.
Good last word. Sorry, good last word. Okay.